Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Orville Season 2. In this video I will go episode by episode, reviewing every episode of the Orville Season 2. So at the start, of course, with the spoiler warning for up to the end of Season 2 of the Orville. If you haven't seen all of Season 2, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. Okay, so I decided to title this video, I did not like the Orville Season 2, which I usually don't do. Usually I just, call my video review, and you click on the review and you find out whether I like it or not like it. But I think it was kind of important for me to make it clear that this is not going to be a very positive review. And the reason why I think that was important is because every single other solitary review or opinion I've heard about the Season 2 of the Orville loved it. Said they thought it was better than Season 1, and I personally do not understand that. It feels like I'm living in Bizarro world. I think that Season 2 of the Orville was clearly subpar to Season 1. I had so many issues with it. I couldn't even believe it. And I did a review for Season 1 of the Orville, which I was somewhat, I was more negative than the general hype over the internet, and I got like 5 dislikes on that video, like within the first couple of hours I uploaded it. So who knows how many dislikes I'm going to get on this video, but I don't care. I don't leave your dislikes, leave your angry comments, call me names. It's not going to stop me from giving my honest opinion, even if it differs from what the popular opinion and what the masses say about this season, which honestly, I just don't get. And I'm not trying to be contrarian. There's many times where my opinion does line up with popular opinion, but in this case it doesn't. I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm not going to, it is kind of tempting to just not do a review on the Orville, because I know everyone's going to complain. No one's going to agree with me. Everyone's going to hate what I have to say. But hopefully there's some people out there that agree with me, or at the very least still want to hear my opinion, still want to hear what I have to say, even if they don't completely agree with me. I know there's going to be, because titling it the video that I don't like, Season 2, I know there's going to be some people who just click on the video, don't even watch it, and leave an angry comment. That's just the internet for you. So be it. But if you do actually want to watch this video instead of just leaving an angry comment telling me why I'm wrong before you even hear my argument, then okay, this video is here for you. So, I did not like Season 2 of the Orville. Very much. Like, I didn't totally hate it, and it's funny because the one person I knew who agreed with me on the Orville Season 2 is my brother, Epkin Tomko. He has his own channel. He actually started to review the Orville episode by episode, but then he was sick of getting negative comments because he wasn't very positive about the episodes, and rightfully pointing out that it's a Star Trek ripoff, and of course some people disagreed with that very truthful fact of life, not opinion. Anyway, so I wanted to do a discussion video with him to have someone who's sort of similar minded and back me up, but he was unable to do so because he stopped watching this season. I think he stopped, but even before halfway through, because he just lost interest in Season 2. So I probably liked it better than him because I watched to the end, at the very least. I was willing to stick with it, and I did think I thought I had a really rough start. I think the first batch of episodes were definitely the worst. I did think it gets slightly better towards the end. But it's funny because when I did my Season 1 review, I talked about how I refused to compare it with Star Trek Discovery, because basically I thought the two shows were pretty on par. It was hard for me to say which one I liked better, and I was sick of people comparing it. Mostly just say the Orville's way better than Discovery, which I didn't agree with that assessment. I thought they were two totally different shows. But in Season 2, as far as Season 2 goes, I am willing to compare it to Discovery. And I will flat out say that Discovery blew this out of the water, in my opinion. Yes, I can hear the dislikes. I can hear the angry comments being typed just as I say those words. But I'm sorry, this is very much how I feel. In fact, like every week, because it kind of annoyed me how the two had to compete with each other. I don't know who's responsible for that. I get the impression that it's Fox and the Orville, but maybe not. Maybe it's CBS with Discovery. I don't know, but they had to come out at the exact same time, and not even at the exact same day. But, so it's hard I can understand why people would want to compare them, because even the shows themselves are obviously competing with each other. And the funny thing is like, I watched when that day came, when these, two episodes came out, I would be like, oh, I can't wait to watch Discovery tonight. And that was all I'd think about. And I'd watch Discovery and I'd be like, oh, usually I'd be like, wow, that episode was really good. Or sometimes I'd be like, yeah, that wasn't as good as it could have been. So I want to go online to hear what people are saying about Discovery. And then I go on YouTube, and my title page, I'll see some videos about the Orville. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. The Orville comes out this day too. Totally forgot. Well, I might as well watch that too. Might as well. So that was sort of my perspective. Now, I didn't think season 2 of Discovery was perfect. It had some issues towards the later half of the season, some sort of structural issues, and I went into this when I talked about Discovery in my season 2 Discovery review. But overall, I would say it was better, much better than Orville season 2. And every week, I was like, yeah, that Discovery episode was so much better. There were 2 weeks that were the exception where I actually liked the Orville better. And that was the week, I believe the episode with, I believe it's called A Happy Refrain, with Isaac and Happy Refrain is when Isaac and the Doctor sort of get together, and that aired the same week as Discovery had their Klingon episode, which I didn't really like. And the Happy Refrain is probably my favorite episode of the season. So in that case, I was like, okay, this week the Orville is much better than Discovery. And I think the other example is when the Discovery season finale aired, and the Orville penultimate episode aired the same day. And I actually thought the penultimate episode was pretty interesting, whereas I thought the Discovery season finale was a giant disappointment. So those 2 weeks are the exception. But normally, I don't know. Okay, so now you might be like, well, why are you such an idiot, Mark? Or why do you not like this, the Orville season 2 that much? And I'll tell you why. And I went in this in detail when I talked about season 1 of the Orville. The reason why I liked season 1 of the Orville so much is because it was a comedy. And it was a comedy parody. And I made this analogy to like Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, or Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, one of my favorite movies of all time. And if I compare it to The Shawshank Redemption or something like that, that's also one of my favorite movies of all time. You can't really compare the two. One's a comedy, one's a serious drama, which is why I didn't want to compare Orville to Discovery in season 1, because one was a comedy parody and the other was the Star Trek show, where one was a parody of Star Trek. Two totally different things, apples and oranges. I don't think you could compare them. And the Orville had a lot of issues, but that I was willing to dismiss, or to take, not have, they weren't issues for me. It didn't bother me because it's a comedy. It's like Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. You have this guy going around going, alrighty then, when people don't really talk like that in real life, but you go with it because it's a comedy. And a lot of other goofy things happen in comedies, and you just go with them and not accept it and not worry about it because, it's just the part of the genre of the comedy. But if you're watching a serious drama and you have people acting really goofy and out of character, but it's not a comedy, then that's a character flaw. Then that is a flaw that hurts the story and takes you out of it, and it destroys its credibility. So the issue I have with the Orville season 2 is that it stopped trying to be a comedy. And so as soon as it stopped, the Orville season 2 tried to be more like a serious drama with some comedic elements, whereas season 1 of the Orville was a comedy with some serious elements. And that's a huge difference. And season 2 was pretty much ditching the comedy genre for a more serious genre. So as soon as it did that, all those flaws that I was willing to just take for granted and dismiss and not worry about came rushing back. They were no longer dismissible. And they were flaws in this drama because it was trying to be serious drama. Also, the fact that it was ripping off Star Trek so fucking heavily in season 1, it's a parody. That's what parodies do. That's the whole point of a parody, is to take something, do something similar, and make fun of it and make jokes out of it. Where here, they weren't parodying anything. They weren't taking something and making jokes out of it. They were just copying it. Because now it's a drama. It's not a comedy anymore. And sure, there's still some comedic elements, but it's more of a drama with some comedy rather than a comedy with some drama. And I think that's a serious distinction, and it does make me look at the Orville in a whole different light. And this season in particular, I think was really bad at ripping off Star Trek and presenting nothing new. Like, there's a couple of specific cases, which I'll get into later, where I feel that the Orville had a huge chance, like it had opportunities to do something fresh, to do something original, because are some original elements to the show. There are some really interesting characters to the show, which is why I kept watching, which is why I enjoyed watching the show, even if it was just at a surface level. And so they had opportunities to take these original elements and go in their own direction, do something new, do something fresh. But did they do that? No. Instead, they just did the exact same thing as Star Trek, Next Generation, mostly. They instead of going their own way, they're just ripping off Star Trek. They're just doing what Star Trek has already done, but less interesting. And I'm sorry. I mean, maybe I just want something out of my TV shows differently than most people do. Maybe some people are happy with just seeing a carbon copy of Next Generation. Maybe that's what they want to see from Discovery, and they're unhappy because it's not a carbon copy. I don't know. I'm not saying that's definitely the case for everyone, but I don't know. Maybe it is, because why do people like the Orville season 2 better than Discovery? I don't get it. I'm sorry, but I don't. Week after week, I thought, God, sucks. But anyway, not every week. Some episodes were good. So let me stop with this preamble. If you're still watching, you haven't hate quit and left an angry comment yet. Let me go ahead and get into every episode of the Orville, and let's start with the first episode of season 2, Jaloja, or however you pronounce it, Jaloja. So this, as I take it, it's been a while since I've seen this, but this is the first episode when they go to Bortus's homeworld so he can pee. It's like this, and I like that element of it. Like, I thought that was an interesting concept, that, they take the alien, and this almost felt like a season 1 comedy type, because they're sort of making light of it. But the issue with my issue I had with this episode is it didn't focus on that. That was only like, that storyline was kind of just incidental, and the main focus of the episode was this love triangle thingy with Seth MacFarlane. And I still can't get over this Seth MacFarlane trying to be the captain of the show. Ed Mercer, yeah. I still can't get over this. I can't. This is the thing. Like, Seth MacFarlane being the captain, for a comedy, fine. For a serious drama, no! I cannot take Seth MacFarlane seriously. I'm sorry, but I just can't. And especially the fact that his first officer is his ex-wife, I can't. That's not a serious drama. I can't take that seriously. I had an issue with this even when it was a comedy, but for a serious drama, and this whole episode focused on his obsessing over her, and it was just, oh my God, it just did not work for me at all. And I don't know, I don't remember all of this episode because I said it's been a while since I've seen it, but I just remembered, like, oh my God, having a whole episode focused on him obsessing over his ex is not something I want to see. Alright. You know, I will say the whole peeing joke and making jokes about seeing someone pee, that was, and just I had to exploring different cultures. That aspect was interesting, but as I said, that's not what the episode was focused on. Anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is called Primal Urges. Now, I went to IMDb to try to refresh my memory of what each episode is about, and the synopsis for this episode reads that the crew raced to save a small group of survivors on a planet about to be destroyed by the sun. And when I read the description, I was like, what? I don't remember an episode like that. What the hell? I don't remember this episode. But then I went and saw the pictures, and I saw, like, Bortus on the holodeck, whatever the fuck they call it on this show. It's basically just a holodeck with a bunch of the other dudes. I was like, oh, this is the porn episode. Why didn't that description is one of the worst descriptions I've seen. I don't know if that's an official description or if that's something the fan wrote, but it's totally not what this episode is about. This is the porn episode. It should just say it's the porn episode. And and I don't know. I didn't really like this episode either. It seemed like, I don't know, I heard somewhere that this was kind of filmed in season 1 but withheld because it deals with, Bortus having the issue with his what his partner did by forcing their child to have a sex change. And yeah, it does feel like out of place here. Like, it's been like months and months and he seemed fine with it. Now all of a sudden he's not okay with it and is bothering to a point. And but, like, again, like, if this was more of a comedy, like, I could find it funny that doing the whole thing that the ship gets a virus because it's porn, because if you watch too much porn you get a virus on your computer or whatever, ha ha ha. But they didn't play it as a comedy. They played it as a serious drama. So instead of finding it cute or funny, I found it stupid. and they tried to, the ship is in danger because it has this virus, and what's his face, LaForge ripoff name? Was it Lamar? Yeah, like, he's trying to fix the issue, and I don't care. Like, it seems like they could have done something with this episode. Like, it did have some somewhat interesting elements, such as, like, the marital issues between Bortus and Cliven, and it seemed like they could have went somewhere with that, but they didn't. They didn't really, and, like, the whole thing with him having porn. I mean, this is going to holodeck and having sex with holograms. That, I don't know. Is that really porn though? It seems a bit different to me. But they were treating it as if it was just porn. I don't know. I think this was if it was supposed to be an analogy for porn addiction, this was done very poorly. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Home. This episode was fine. Like, I didn't really have an issue with this episode. I guess my biggest issue was they got rid of the character Alar, because she was my favorite character on the show. And I think I heard before the season started that she was going to leave the show, and I was really hoping that wasn't true. But it turned out it was. But apparently the actress wanted to leave the show, so there's nothing they can really do about it. So I can't really blame the show for that. And if they were going to send the character off, this was an interesting way to do it. They had Robert Picardo on as their father. He appeared in season 1, like, through communications, so they actually had to make an appearance. And it's funny because the villain of the episode was, what's his face? John Billingsley, I believe his name is, who played Dr. Phlox. So they had Dr. Phlox versus the Doctor on Voyager. So that was, I kind of like that, just the concept of that. But the episode itself was somewhat interesting, that they tried to do a home take over the home. And it's kind of convenient that this crisis just so happened to arise when she was visiting her parents, but just get over that. And It was a somewhat entertaining episode, having her, because she's suffering through the effects of, whatever. She's used to being like the strongest person in the room, but now she's not at all. And plus having so how she has to deal with that, and plus having to deal with her parents who are overbearing and want her to do something in science and philosophy. I mean, yeah, I didn't think this episode was amazing, but it was decent. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Alright, so let's get to the next episode, which is Nothing Left on Earth Except Fishes. So this episode is the follow-up to the episode of The Krill, which was the episode I really liked. You got that same character who came back because you found out that the girl that Captain Mercer was dating was actually that Krill undercover, disguised as a human in order to infiltrate, and she leads him right into it because they say, "Oh, let's go on a romantic holiday," and she leads him to a trap, and they get captured by the Krill. Now, that was an interesting concept. I was totally on board. Kind of reminded me of the Next Generation episode, The Mind's Eye, but not too much to be considered a ripoff. Don't get me wrong. This is a case where it just invoked that feeling without feeling like a carbon copy, which is what the show should be aiming for, but too often it does feel like a carbon copy, but I'll get to that later. In this case, it actually worked for me until until once the Krill storyline kicked in, and then it did get boring. I'm sorry, I really liked the season 1 episode, The Krill. I thought there was high tension with Mercer and Gordon on the ship. That was a really high tension. I thought that had the perfect blend. I think that might have been my favorite episode of season 1. I had the perfect blend of comedy and tension, whereas this episode had neither. I just did not care for this episode at all. I thought it was boring. And then he went and crashed on the planet with her, and she's still being unreasonable. He's trying to win her over, and I kind of didn't really get what they were going for. I didn't get any strong character story. I didn't really get any development. I don't know, because she kind of has the right to hate him because he did kill a bunch of people last time, of her people last time they met, and it seems like it's a bit obtuse for her to actually be won over by him. So I didn't really. It seemed like they were going for an enemy mind sort of thing, and that storyline had been ripped off by Star Trek like 5 times, or maybe 4 times. There was a Next Generation episode, The Enemy, and then Enterprise, in the episode that was ripped. That was the exact same thing, and so now they're trying the same thing again, but they didn't even get the formula right. I mean, it's like they were trying to rip it off, but they just did a half-assed version that failed to rip it off properly, and I don't even understand what they were trying to do with this episode. I did not like it at all. I thought it was a failure. Anyway, and in that episode, the Krill from season 1 was so good too, and that this would be the follow-up was just a huge disappointment. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is All the World is a Birthday Cake. Okay, I have a lot to say about this episode. I almost did a whole video just on this episode because, boy howdy, did I have a lot of issues with this episode. Alright, so this is the episode where they go to they make first contact with these primitive aliens, and you can tell that something's kind of funky, something's up, but they don't really know what it is, and then they find out that the aliens think that everyone of a certain star sign is automatically a murderer, and they think that so when they find out that Kelly and Bortus were from that star sign, they lock them up, and they think that the mercenaries people are backwards for letting people that star sign be active members of society. Now, okay, so let me get with the issues I had with this episode. First off, I'm just noticing the difference between the way, I don't even remember what the fuck this organization's called. Federation ripoffs, I'll just call them that for the moment. The way the Federation ripoffs behave to the actual Federation. Because in this episode, so there's this primitive aliens reach out. They try to, make contact with alien life. So they get their signal and they're like, sure, they're trying to contact us. So we're now free of the Prime Directive ripoff, or whatever they call the equivalent here. And so we can now go and make first contact. Whereas in the actual Federation Starfleet, that's not how it works. In Star Trek, they wouldn't just go make first contact just because someone, primitive alien, puts out a signal. First of all, they have to be warp capable first before they would be allowed to make first contact. But more importantly, they would not just go make first contact with an alien race they know nothing about. They do the duck blind thing. They, for the very least, they study their culture from afar, and then also they would do, in Next Generation times anyway, they do the duck blind thing where they gather information, they study their culture, so they're aware what their culture is like, they're aware of any what their rules of society are, and then they make first contact. And it's funny because when this episode started, and I saw the way that the Orville was behaving, I thought this was going to be another situation like they did in an episode in season 1 that was kind of a rebuttal to the Who Watches the Watchers episode of Next Generation. It was kind of saying how this is why the way Starfleet reacted to that situation is stupid, and this is the way we should react. So I thought that's what they were going to do in this episode, but by having the Orville, or in the Federation ripoffs, whatever they're called, having them act differently. But instead, what they ended up doing is proving why the Orville and the Federation ripoffs policy is stupid, and how the actual Federation on Star Trek's policy is correct. Because if this was the Federation in actual Star Trek, they would know about this star sign bullshit. They would have studied this alien culture from like a duck blind. They would be aware of all the different niceties in the culture, so they would know that, first of all, they would know that they're still too primitive to contact because they have that role of society. So they wouldn't even make contact, but even if they did, they would know not to bring up the fact that other members of star signs, because they would know that they would react very poorly to it. So I don't know. I mean, you could say, well, maybe that's the point of this episode. Maybe the point of the episode was to say that this Federation ripoff thing is not perfect, and they're actually trying to show that they're not as good as the Star Trek guys. But I don't think that's any excuse, because to me, the whole episode was just like showing why this organization sucks and is stupid. And again, if this was a comedy, maybe I could give it some leeway, but it's not. There's nothing really comedic about this episode at all. It's like deadly serious. And so the whole episode, I'm just thinking, well, they're idiots for having this stupid policy, for just saying, oh, they're reaching out radio signals, so we're ready to go and make first contact. Now, I suppose, that maybe that's again, you could say that's some people would argue that is the point, that's an analogy against contacting more primitive cultures without being fully aware of their culture. But the way they went about it by having our heroes do it was just very annoying. It made me question their competence. It made me question their abilities. It made me question the whole organization. How could it exist and have advanced this far if they're this fucking stupid? If they just go out, oh, let's just make contact and go on the planet, and without knowing anything about them, oh, we'll just learn as we go. It'll be all good. Nothing could go wrong, right? I mean, and it was just so frustrating to me. And then once Bortus and Kelly did get captured, and then Ted Danson, was the admiral or whatever, came on and was like, oh, we can't interfere because Prime Directive ripoff says that we can't interfere with the primitive culture. So what they end up doing, and I don't buy that. While it's not okay to interfere with their laws and their culture, but it's perfectly okay to just stop by and say hello with knowing jack shit about them just because they sit on a signal. But anyway, so the solution they come up with is to change the star signs, to create a light in their sky that makes the star sign different and makes it okay. So that they no longer, they'll no longer oppress that certain star sign. And so they're free to let everyone know that go. How is that not interfering with their culture more than just rescuing Bortus and Kelly? Call me naive, but it seems to me that if they simply rescued Bortus and Kelly, that would have a lot less. They changed the whole course of this entire society. Like, all these people who would have been locked up are not locked up, and you could argue one of them could become Hitler, one of them could hold resentments for the fact they was locked up and become murderers, so all these other people would die that they haven't, or maybe one could become a super genius and create this life-saving serum and save a lot of people. So I'm not saying it necessarily has to have a good impact. It could have a positive, negative impact. It could have a positive one, but it's going to have an impact. They're going to drastically avert and change the course of this culture, rather than simply just rescuing Kelly and Bortus, which wouldn't really affect their culture that much at all. So I don't get that. I know, the argument could be made that by doing the star thingy, they're not aware that the Orville people, the Federation ripoffs, are involved with that. But if they wouldn't rescue them, they would know that they were involved. But so fucking what? It doesn't change the fact that it would barely affect their culture at all. I mean, because what do they care if those idiot aliens hate them? Because they don't want to make contact with them anyway, because now they figured out they're the bunch of primitives who think the star signs are affected everyone's culture, so they're not going to want to make contact with them. So what do they care if they hate them or not? I don't know. And plus, it seemed like this episode was trying to be as really bashing astrology, but no one really takes it that fucking serious, or at least on that society level. So if they were trying to make some greater social commentary about that, then I think it kind of sucks. But I don't even know if they are. But anyway, enough about that episode. Okay, so let me move on to a happy refrain, and I'm happy to talk about this episode. And this is the one, as I said, I think this is probably my favorite episode of this season. This is the one episode I thought worked on every level. I think again, it's because it had that classic comedy. Even though you could argue this is more of a drama romance episode than it was a comedy, it still had that comedy that worked with the characters, worked with the story like season 1 did, and it was really effective comedy. The way that Isaac was like, did my vocal malfunction? I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was so good, seeing. And this episode is basically, now there's a lot of episodes I'll get into this season that are basically rip-offs of Next Generation episodes, and this is kind of taken from the Next Generation episode, In Theory, where Data, dates a woman. So this is pretty much a version of that. But here's the thing, and this is the only case where I'll say this, particularly with season 2 of the Orville. This episode's actually better than In Theory. So this episode actually improves upon the episode it's ripping off. So for me, because In Theory wasn't even that good of an episode, and this episode I thought was very good. I thought it was very funny, it was very heartfelt, I bought the characters. So this is a chance where they actually improved upon the Next Generation episode, which is the only example, unfortunately. So I can excuse it for ripping off this episode, because they actually do a better job at it. The relationship they portray between Isaac and Dr. Finn, and how Isaac's trying to win her over, and it's of course a bit naive because he's an android, and Dr. Finn has to come to terms with her affections to me. And part of the reason why I think this is better in theory, it's not just because the chemistry worked better, the comedy worked better, but also because they didn't end the relationship at the end of the episode. I think that was bold. Like most episodic, would have a romance of, they had to have Data breaking up with the woman, and she's never seen it on the show again, which is, to me, that's the episodic nature of TNG coming to bite it on its ass. It would be a lot more interesting, a lot more risky if they kept it going as an ongoing relationship, and this episode made the bold choice to do that. And so I have to give it a lot of credit for that, to keep this relationship going, which I thought. So I don't really have anything negative to say about this episode. I actually like this episode a lot. So let me move over to the next episode, which is Deflectors. What the fuck happened in this episode? It says the ship's deflectors upgrade leads to conflict between the Makalan culture and the crew. So this is the episode where this Makalan comes on board to modify the ship, and it turns out that he's attracted to women. Now, I thought this was an interesting concept. And because he's attracted to women, that makes him an outcast. It's kind of, they do the homosexual discrimination analogy, which I thought was a really interesting concept. And I used the Mocklans a lot to make commentary on LGBT, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. And it's funny because, getting back to the porn episode with Boris, when something was up with Boris at first, I thought that maybe he was into women. He was starting to get into women because he's been around humans and he's been around gendered species too much. And so he was starting to find an attractiveness to a woman. And I honestly think that would have been more interesting than this episode. Not to mention that porn episode sucked. It would have made that episode way more interesting as well. This episode, they introduced a whole new character to do that. And, don't get me wrong, I still think it was interesting at first. It started how he had a thing for the new security chief. And I think their relationship was interesting at first. But then the whole storyline where he faked his death or hid or whatever, and it turned out to be a bit of an asshole. I think that kind of ruined the episode. I didn't really get that, why they did that. I don't know. I don't think this episode totally sucked, but it was just yeah. They started out so good, but then it just kind of dull. I don't know. I don't think it was a very effective analogy, in my opinion. Okay, so let's get into the big two-parter, Identity Parts 1 and 2. Now, when this episode was released, I watched a bunch of reviews. People were loving this. They say, oh, this is Orville at his best. This is best of both worlds all over again. This is so good. And I was just sitting here thinking, really? Really? I mean, how can you guys think that? I'm sorry, but how? This is what I was referring to in my intro. This is where I think this is first of all, this is a huge retcon of the Kalan, and I don't like it. This is a retcon in the worst part because this does not fit in. You can't tell me at all that this is what they were thinking of Isaac and the Kalan when they were first established in season 1. Fuck no. There's no way in hell that they were thinking of this. This is something they definitely just came. Honestly, I don't think this even fits with 2 episodes prior, Happy Refrain. I think this is just something they just thought up on the spot. Now, I know I always get the argument, well, Mark, there's nothing wrong with thinking up of stuff on the spot and not having things planned out because Breaking Bad did that and it was really good. No, but as I will say, there's nothing wrong with that if it works. If it doesn't, if it isn't beyond obvious that they're just making shit up as they go, if it's beyond obvious that they're making shit up as they go, then it sucks. Breaking Bad wasn't obvious. I couldn't tell at all. I thought they had it all planned out, but it turns out they were really good at making stuff up as they went. This is not. This is a horrible retcon. And this is what I was talking about in my intro, about how they had an opportunity here to do something original, to do something fresh with the Kaylon. The Kaylon was an interesting concept. I mean, Isaac was a bit of a Data ripoff. I mean, there's no denying that. But the Kaylon himself, because Data was like his own thing. He wasn't a member of a artificially intelligent species. He was just his own thing. This episode could have went in a really interesting direction where they meet Isaac's people, and there's something like weird about them, and they tried in the Federation ripoffs try to make peace with them, but it doesn't quite work out. And they could have went in the direction that Star Trek didn't go in. They could have been original. They could have been fresh. This could have been really fascinating. But they threw that all away to do a best of both worlds ripoff. To me, that is a huge missed opportunity. And I can't believe like some people were like, oh, this is just as exciting as best of both worlds. No, it's not. This is obviously, it seems like it's half-assed ripoff compared to that's trying too hard, by the way, to be like that. Now, I don't think this episode completely sucked, but I think the direction they went in was a huge disappointment compared to what they could have done. And as I said, they completely retconned the Kaylon, because instead of having them be the super intelligent android species, which is kind of friendly, kind of not, which is a very interesting, unique concept to the Orville. Now let's throw that out the door to do the fucking Borg again. Let's just have this original species that we have. Nah, fuck that. We don't want anything original in this show. Let's just make them a ripoff of the Borg. And I think that sucks. I'm sorry. I was very disappointed with that. And I don't think this fits with Happy Refrain. I know some people might argue with me. I don't think Isaac's character at all adds up to this. I know they try to have built-in excuses in this episode to why Isaac was actually friendly to the people in Orville, and that was all part of the disease. But really, if he was just sent there all along just to be like a spy to learn information about them so the Kaylon can conquer the humans or whatever, know their defenses, if they're this powerful, why would they even need a spy? And why would they have Isaac act like he's an actual member of the crew and appreciates and likes the crew, and he was like so involved in trying to be human that he wanted to fall in love and impress this woman even though he couldn't feel emotions. Oh, but that's all part of a subterfuge, or that's because they programmed him to be more friendly so the humans wouldn't notice. I'm not buying any of that. Any excuse you can come up with. I think it's a total retcon. I think it's inconsistent. This episode were mildly entertaining, I will give you that. It was kind of suspenseful, but honestly, I didn't think of best of both worlds when I watched this, well, except for the fact that it's obviously trying to be like it. But in terms of quality, I wouldn't put it up with. It reminded me more of a Stargate two-parter. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Stargate SG-1, but to me, in just my opinion, Stargate SG-1 and especially Atlantis will always be sort of subpart of Star Trek, and it's obvious they're always, even those shows are trying to be like Star Trek, and so I would never put a two-parter of Stargate up to the quality of a two-parter from Star Trek, especially one as good as Best of Both Worlds. So, I think the same thing about the Orville. To me, the Orville is more of on par with Stargate, maybe not even as good. Because some of this retconning is irritating me. And plus, Stargate, even though they did borrow heavily from Star Trek, regardless of the SG-1 fans will deny this, they definitely did. But they weren't nearly as bad as the Orville, or as blatant about it. Like, they didn't do it to its detriment the way that the Orville does. But you know what? Ironically, Best of Both Worlds isn't the episode I think this episode ripped off the most from. This episode, and I don't think I haven't seen anyone made this connection before, but the episode that this reminds me the most of, which I think is pretty much borrowing very heavily from, is this Voyager episode from season 2, just a standalone episode that's not very well known, where B'Elanna Torres finds this artificial being robot and like floating in space. She repairs him and he seems grateful and it seems like they're becoming friends, but then his other robot friends come and they capture her and they demand that she make more robots, and so she starts to, and then finds out that the robots are in a current war with another race of robots, and they find out that both of these robots killed their own creators because the creators were in a war with each other, so they used the robots and other official beings in order to fight the wars for them. But eventually they came to a peace, so they were going to dismantle all the robots. So the robots, rather than be dismantled, killed their creators, and so they could continue this everlasting conflict. And actually, first of all, the Kaline look a lot like those robots in this Voyager episode. Hold on, I gotta look up what this name of this episode. Prototype, yeah, it's called Prototype. So yeah, the Kaline look a lot similar in design, just aesthetically, to the robots that were in Prototype, and also the fact that they killed their own creators. Like when that reveal came, I'm like, hey, it's just like the other robots, and the fact that they went beyond, they want to kill all life, just like the other robots just wanted to keep fighting this war. It was, I don't know, very, very heavily ripped off for that one. Anyway, all right. I can just picture all the angry comments I'm getting in my head, but I guess I'll see them soon enough. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Blood of Patriots. Okay, so I don't get this episode. This is not ripping off a specific Star Trek episode, but this is just such the bland story we've seen, not just in Star Trek, but pretty much any sci-fi show. You got Stargate, Farscape, Battlestar Galactica, what have you. It's such a cliche story, and it's done to such a cheesy level that did remind me a lot of season 1 or 2 of Next Generation. I mean, that's how bland and cheesy I thought this episode was, where it's so predictable, and it's because the Federation ripoffs are trying to make peace with the Krill, and but Gordon has his old friend, war buddy, whatever, comes on board, and turns out it reminds me of the second episode of Deep Space Nine. What was that called? Something, I can't remember what the episode was called, but the same, Kira had this old terrorist buddy, and she was trying to look out for him, and it turns out that he was an asshole trying to sabotage the Federation. That's what this episode reminds me of. But I'm sure there's actually a lot of episodes like that. And so this dude tries to start a war with the Krill, and it turns out his daughter isn't really his daughter, someone who's using the smuggling the bomb or whatever, and there's a huge plot, and Gordon's torn between his loyalties. Oh no, who's he gonna choose? Is he actually gonna betray Ed? I bet you he is, because I'm a moron who doesn't know how these kind of TV shows work. God damn it. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Lasting Impressions. This episode is actually decent. I thought this maybe a bit on the dull side, but I thought it was an interesting concept. I thought it was an interesting character story. It was about Gordon finding the time capsule and creating I actually think this was a much, much, much better than that stupid porn episode. This was a much better use of the holodeck ripoff, whatever they call it, by having Gordon immerse himself recreate this woman from the time capsule and actually start to basically fall in love with her. But you know what? I want to say this episode is another example of this episode being better than a Star Trek episode that's ripping off. Because this reminds me a lot of that Voyager episode, Fairhaven, which I hated. It's in like my top 10 worst Voyager episodes. Hated that episode where Janeway falls in love with this hologram on the holodeck and she starts to alter his program to make him the perfect man. I think this episode is a much better version of that. I think it does I do feel it's a bit, maybe not a direct ripoff, but it's definitely borrowing heavily from it. But it does a much better job. And where I bought Gordon's feelings for it, I bought this relationship. I didn't buy the relationship between Janeway and this random Irish guy. I thought that was stupid. But I bought the relationship, and I think it was built up to and developed nicely. It was a nice romantic progression, and I did like how his friends were kind of being like, that's a hologram. You do know that, right? And he was trying to be like, nah, it's all good, but then he realizes, and I like how the issue comes where he tries to delete the boyfriend, but by deleting the boyfriend, he completely alters her personality. Although I will say, and I kind of came up with this issue with the whole Deep Space Nine when they did the stupid Vic Fontaine storyline, that the holodeck or whatever, holodeck ripoff, whatever they have on the Orville, is customizable. Gordon really could have always just been like, hey, I mean, I could understand how the computer would fuck up after he said remove the boyfriend and it changes her personality, but it's customizable. He could have went in and changed it, but like, actually, why don't you bring the personality traits where she's a singer and whatever and still artistic, but just delete the boyfriend. I mean, surely he could have done that. But, plot purposes, they had to be him come to this realization, oh no, I can't change one thing without changing anything, which I don't think that's really how those kind of programs would work. They seem highly customizable. But that aside, I thought it was a decent episode. I thought it was decent, and maybe not the best, but it was interesting. It worked for what it did. But the one gripe I have about this show, which I've had since season 1, that always irritated me. Although season 1's a comedy, so I could let gripes like this go more, and it's a serious drama, it's more of an issue. But the way that in some episodes, like this episode, and there were a few others in season 1 where they'd be like, 21st century, I know nothing about the 20th. What was that like? I don't know. I'm totally ignorant about the 21st century. We're constantly throughout the show, they're making references to the 20th and 21st century. They're watching fucking Seinfeld. They're singing to Dolly Parton, which I'll get to shortly. And they're making, fucking Gordon was talking about Avis, which is a car rental place from the 20th, 21st century. And you're like, oh, 21st century, I know not. Bullshit. You constantly make references to the 21st. It's so inconsistent. But anyway. Anyway. Let's get into the next episode, which is Sanctuary. So this is, the whole Dolly Parton thing, I'm sorry. That was really cheesy. Again, this is something I could forgive if this was a comedy, but it's not a comedy show. They're deciding to be a serious drama. And so since they made that decision, that's no longer a funny, quirky thing. It's stupid and dumb, and I don't like it. And this, I don't really like what they're doing with the Mocklins, too. I wouldn't really say that they're retconning them, or at least not to the extent they did with the Kalon. But they're certainly going in a different direction with them than they had originally set out to do in season 1, and making it more like they're the bigoted, sexist, homophobes, or whatever you want to call them analogy. And I don't know. I don't mind them doing an analogy for that. I just think using the Mocklins to do it, and the way they started focusing more and more and more on the Mocklins, they try to excuse in this episode, like, well, how could a bigoted race be so heavily involved in the Federation ripoffs if they're that bigoted? When they try to excuse it or explain it away, it's because they're the Federation ripoffs need the resources, and they're basically their main manufacturer of the weapons, because of course a race of all men, of course they create all the weapons, blah blah blah. I don't know, but and that's why the Federation ripoffs are so not willing to just let them go, and so they have to come up with this silly compromise at the end where no one's really happy, but the women get to live free. But they still, I still feel like they turn to the Federation ripoffs for more help, and they kind of like they didn't end up getting arrested. They could still live their lives, but their whole underground network was dismantled, so they can't free anyone else. So I think they would have been better off if the Orville never discovered them in the first place. And I think the Federation ripoffs kind of failed them. And I think the politics in this episode with the Federation ripoffs felt more like modern day United States, or at least modern day United Nations, than it did actual Federation. So they're not being so much of a Federation ripoff in this episode. And yeah, I actually don't like that. I actually think it's inconsistent, because he's been portrayed as Federation ripoffs with high principles, yet they weren't willing to do the right thing because they're too afraid of alienating the dudes that make their weapons. Anyway, like, I didn't totally hate this episode. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was pretty intense. I liked the scenes where Kelly and Borders went down to the plant and stuck up for them. But apparently, after they just shot a whole bunch of Mocklins and shot at their ship, the Mocklins are now perfectly okay with that fact just because they came to some agreement. But anyway, it was okay. So, let me get to the next episode, which is tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And actually, as I alluded to earlier, I actually liked this episode. I thought this, to me, I didn't really have any issues with this. This was kind of it was an interesting ripoff of Tapestry. Not as good as Tapestry, but as decent still, and original enough for me to not, be too hung up on the fact that it's a ripoff of Tapestry. And kind of like the Second Chances episode. Actually, it's probably more like the Second Chances episode of Next Generation is like Tapestry, but you got little vibes of both of those. Tapestry probably feeds more into the next episode. But, yeah, but it's kind of like Second Chances, where there's a duplicate Riker, and so he still has feelings for Troy, and so Troy starts to relive the relationship with Riker. So they do the same fucking thing with Kelly, so they have the version of her from, 7 years in the past, right before, right after the first date she had with Ed. So her and Ed are trying to hook it up, and I thought the scene where at the club, like, again, if they committed to the comedy thing, I'd be able to forgive this scene, but they're not committing to the comedy scene, so the scene was stupid. Like, that was so stereotypical. Oh, old guys are they can't be in the party club, and why would she go to a club like that on the fucking... They were trying to play, oh, look, she's young! Alright, so that was a bit stupid. But, so I guess I do have some complaints about this episode. But overall, I found it kind of somewhat interesting, the concept of I like how when the two Kellys sort of argued with each other, because that was a really nice analogy to, and this is something that Star Trek didn't really do with either Tapestry or Second Chance. Although you got the two Rikers arguing with each other, but that was a bit different, because in this case the Kelly is actually from 7 years ago. So I actually thought the two Kellys arguing worked better than the two Rikers arguing Next Gen, which I didn't actually buy that much. Here I actually thought it was better. Because it's an interesting concept of how, if you met yourself 7 years ago, what would you think of them? What would they think of you? And I like how at first, like, the older Kelly thought this younger Kelly was irresponsible, and the younger one thought the older one, like, ruined her life and was pissed off that she, the life went the way that she went. And then, but by the end of it, they were able to sort of reconcile and appreciate stuff about themselves, which I thought was actually really well done. So this was I wouldn't say it was a great episode, but it was, I think it was one of the better of the season. because I didn't think much of the season otherwise. Yeah. So anyway, this leads into the season finale, The Road Not Taking, which is a Yesterday's Enterprise and Tapestry ripoff. And I thought this episode sucked. I'm sorry. I'm going to write out and say it. This is like, you take Yesterday's Enterprise, which is arguably the best, or at least one of the best episodes of The Next Generation, one of the best episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. You take that, you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. You know how you make a copy of a copy, it starts to lose its integrity and lose anything, and it's like, it becomes like this, just plain shell of what the original used to be. That's this episode in a nutshell. This episode is like, it steals the exact same format of a Yesterday's Enterprise, and it has a bit of a sprinkle of Tapestry because the young Kelly fucked with her past, and it had unintended consequences, and unintended consequence of ruining the entire. I will say it's an interesting concept. By not going on a date, she doomed the human race to extinction. I will say I did enjoy that particular aspect of the episode, but not the rest of the episode. The rest of the episode, because here's the thing. Like, Yesterday's Enterprise was such a good episode because you had such a great moral dilemmas, you had such great character interactions, you had such great character stories with Picard and having to be convinced by Guinan, and he's like, no, we can't do it, this could ruin everything, or you asked me to send people to their deaths. And then you had Tasha Yar realizing that she was supposed to die and her wanting to go out in the right way, and her having a relationship with the younger officer on Enterprise C. This episode had none of that. This episode was just a by the numbers, hey, we altered the timeline, we need to go fix it, so let's go fix it, and they go fix it. Like, sure, you get some adventures, or like you get, what's her face, Ilaria appearing again, which seemed just no point to it, just for nostalgia purposes. Hey, there's Ilaria, she's alive again. Oh, no, she's gone. So what? Nothing happens. Oh, she dies. Who cares? And they find Bortus in the Orville at the bottom of the earth, at the bottom of the ocean, and so what? It's like, it was a by the numbers, hey, we need to fix the timeline, so they go and they fix it. That's it. There's no dynamic character stories like there was with Yesterday's Enterprise. There's no moral dilemma, there's no romance, there's no personal character involvement. It's just plain old simple, we need to fix the timeline, and they do. That's it. I mean, you could argue they tried to attempt to do that with Kelly and Ed, reminiscing about how they're not going to date, fuck the whole timeline up, but they really didn't get into that, really. I mean, that wasn't the same thing as having Picard argue with Guinan about, how, is this moral, is this right, sending these people to their death? And it's just a pale shadow. And the fact that they were obviously ripping off Yesterday's Enterprise and ripping off Tapestry makes it worse because they're just ripping it off and it's so obvious. And, again, this is another example where I'm reminded in terms of quality of a lot more of Stargate than I am of Star Trek. Like, this feels like a Stargate episode. Like, particularly they had the Stargate two-parter at the end of season 8 where the timeline got changed, and it was pretty much the same thing where I didn't like that episode either. Stargate's good, but that two-parter sucked because it was just plain by the numbers. Oh, the timeline was altered, people were different, look at how different people are, but they just go back and change it, and there's really nothing to it. And that's what this episode was. Okay, so I'm done with the Orville. Oh boy, I cannot wait to see the comments on this video, let me tell you. Anyway, my rating for the Orville Season 2 out of 10, you know what? I think I'm going to give this a 5 average. I almost gave this a 4. It's like teetering between a 4 and a 5. But going over the episodes again, there's some good aspects of the season. to stop me from giving it a 4. But still, so instead of calling it poor, I'm just going to call it average. Because boy howdy does it rip off Star Trek, and unlike season 1, it's not excusable under the parody label, because it stopped being a comedy. It started being a serious action with some comedic moments. And so it's no longer parodying Star Trek, it's ripping it off. I'm sorry, that distinction's very clear to me. And it's going in worse directions than it could have. It could have been an original show. It could have done original things with some of these original characters. But instead, they chose to just copy Star Trek. And and some of these episodes just don't work. Some of them are just really bland. They feel like season 1, season 2 Star Trek, Next Generation, and kind of cheesy. But as I said, it's not totally horrible. There are some redeeming moments. There's a couple of really good episodes. Like, I still love the Happy Refrain episode. I think that does a much better job than the episodes is emulating. Same with the Lasting Impressions, the Time Capsule episode. That actually does a much better job than Fairhaven. And there are some interesting analogies here, like the Mocklins. They do make some interesting LGBT, commentary and stuff like that. And as I said, I like the young Kelly meeting the old Kelly. So the season was interesting enough for me to say 5 out of 10, but no more than that. I mean, barely is a 5, just barely, because there's so much wrong with this season. I thought it was, week after week, it was just either meh or subpar. My opinion. Grill me for it. I know. I can't wait to see how many dislikes I get on this video. I was really shocked. Again, I gotta reiterate how shocked I was at how positive people were being on this season. I don't get it. It's like I'm living in a bizarre world. But anyway, that is it for my review of the Orville Season 2. And if this video didn't anger you too much, you can be sure to check out my channel as I review many other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.